It was a bright Monday morning in Lagos, and the streets buzzed with the usual hustle. Chijioke, a 37-year-old ambitious entrepreneur dressed in a freshly tailored navy blue suit, adjusted his tie as he stepped into his black SUV. Today was his big break, an interview that could secure a multi-million naira contract with a rising corporate firm. As he revved the engine and joined the chaotic city traffic, he felt the pressure mounting but believed nothing could stand in his way. His entire business depended on this one opportunity. As the traffic lights turned green, he sped off with frustration, trying to make up for lost time. Just a few meters ahead, an old woman stood at the roadside, her wrapper tied high above her knees to avoid the muddy puddles. Chijioke, impatient and careless, swerved close to the roadside and splashed dirty water all over her. She staggered backward, drenched and startled. Instead of stopping to apologize, he glanced at her with disgust and shouted, "Get off the road, mama. You people never learn." He zoomed off without a second thought. The old woman wiped her face slowly, looking after the disappearing car. She said nothing, but her eyes were not filled with anger, they brimmed with something deeper, disappointment. People gathered around her, offering tissues and apologies on behalf of the reckless driver, but she simply nodded and walked away silently. There was something oddly calm about her demeanor. Chijioke arrived at the imposing glass building that housed the headquarters of Zamani Innovations. He parked with pride and took one last look at himself in the mirror. His confidence was unshakable as he entered the building. He was greeted warmly by the receptionist, handed a visitor's tag, and told to wait in the executive lounge. Everything seemed to be going smoothly. He imagined himself shaking hands with the CEO, signing the deal, and finally elevating his struggling company into the big leagues. After a short wait, an assistant ushered him into a large, well-lit boardroom. The chairs were filled with silent directors, their eyes fixed on the empty head seat at the table. The assistant whispered, "Madam CEO will be here shortly." Chijioke nodded, rehearsing his lines in his head. He placed his documents on the table neatly and took a deep breath. Soon, the boardroom door opened, and in walked the CEO. Time seemed to freeze. The woman who entered was the same old woman he had drenched in muddy water that very morning. But now, she wore a sleek white blouse, high-waisted skirt, and pearl earrings. Her poise was undeniable. The board members stood to greet her, and she gave a small smile before taking her seat. She glanced once at Chijioke, her eyes calm but unreadable, and then looked away. Chijioke's heart dropped. He swallowed hard, suddenly unsure of everything. Sweat formed on his forehead, and for a moment, he considered speaking up, apologizing, explaining, but pride held his tongue. Maybe she hadn't recognized him. Maybe she didn't care. He decided to proceed with his presentation as planned. He stood up, clicked through his slides, and spoke with forced confidence, but his usual spark was missing. The room remained silent after his pitch. The CEO finally spoke, her voice clear and calm. "Thank you, Mr. Chijioke. That was enlightening. However, we at Zamani Innovations value not just competence, but character, how our partners treat the least among us, not just how they speak in boardrooms." The air thickened. Some lessons are best learned the hard way. She closed his file and looked at the other directors. Interview dismissed. He tried to interject. "Ma. I didn't know it was you. I was in a hurry, Anne." But she held up her hand gently. "You knew I was a human being." Then she turned her eyes to the next candidate's file. The assistant walked over and asked Chijioke to step out. Shame consumed him as he collected his materials and walked out, his dream crumbling into dust behind him. Outside the boardroom, he leaned against the wall and felt the weight of his arrogance crash down. The drive home felt longer than ever. He turned off the radio, unable to bear the sound. He kept seeing her face, not when she sat as CEO, but when he had splashed her earlier that morning. Her drenched wrapper. Her startled face. The way he had screamed at her like she was nothing. He hadn't just lost a contract. He had lost a piece of his dignity. That night, he sat alone in his living room, phone off, curtains drawn. He called his mother and cried. Not about the deal, but about the kind of man he had allowed himself to become. He remembered her words as a boy, always be kind, even when you're in a hurry. You never know who's watching. He had dismissed those words as old-fashioned. Now they echoed with bitter truth. The next day, he returned to the spot where he had splashed the woman, hoping to find her. She wasn't there. For weeks, he drove past that same place, each time slowing down at the sight of an elderly person, offering help or just greeting them with respect. Something inside him had changed. It was no longer about fixing his reputation, it was about repairing his soul. Months passed. Chijioke's business struggled, but he no longer chased contracts with the same desperation. He began to take smaller jobs and offer free training sessions to unemployed youths in his community. He felt a different kind of fulfillment. His name wasn't making headlines, but his actions were leaving impressions that mattered more. One afternoon, during a local business summit organized for youth entrepreneurs, he was invited to speak. He told the story of his failure, not the failed pitch, but the failed character. The crowd listened in silence, touched by his humility. When he finished, a woman approached him, tears in her eyes. My son almost lost his way too. Thank you for reminding him to return. As the event ended, someone tapped him on the shoulder. It was one of the directors from Zamani Innovations. He smiled and handed Chijioke a card. Madam CEO told us to keep an eye on you. We don't invest in people at their peak, we invest in those who've learned. It wasn't a job offer. It was something more valuable, a second chance. Chijioke smiled, holding the card tightly. This time, he would walk a different path. The road ahead would be longer, and he would walk it slowly, with kindness guiding his every step.